Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday workshop, where we get together in the middle of the week to learn more about technology. This is the third Wednesday of the month, and normally it's a Linux, but this is kind of a special one, as you can see with the background behind me, because today we're going to be talking about Linux alongside Windows. Today is part one. Thought you'd like that out. Part one of our workshop series on dual booting Linux alongside of Windows. And we will have part 2, 3 next month. So today, Alan German from Ottawa, who's back from France, I think, and back from another appointment, is just raced in here hot off the press to share with us today about how easy you can have Linux alongside of Windows. So Alan, take it over.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Good afternoon, everyone. So, as John said, we're going to be talking about dual booting, and this is part one indeed. And part two is going to be given by John himself. So I asked John what he thought about dual booting and who should dual boot. And I think we're on the same page. We're basically talking about people who use Windows, especially those who are running Windows 10, who have reached end of life as of yesterday. So John suggests that we should be talking to Windows users who still need to use Windows programs. And if you don't have security updates anymore, then you'll be probably wanting to use Windows offline. But you also need an operating system that you can use anytime. So you can go online and do everything else that you normally do. And that's basically where Linux comes in. So the presentation is basically aimed at Windows users, but I'll have a couple of things later on which may be novel to some of you Linux people out there too. So why dual boot? That really is the big time question for Windows users. And as I said, Windows 10 reached end of life yesterday. So you may, if you haven't updated to the Extended Security Updates program, you may find a message that says your machine isn't receiving security updates anymore. So if you're in that state, you really should be thinking about what to do next. And even if you've got the ESU program, you've basically got a year. They may extend it again, who knows? That's why I have the question mark. But right now you have a year of extended updates for Windows, and then you're back in the same boat you were a week or two ago, and we're thinking, what should you do next? One of the nice things about being able to do boot is that you can basically look at Linux on your existing hardware and assess it for your future needs. Certainly if you have Windows programs that won't run on Linux, you'll have to be able to run Windows somehow, and dual booting is one of the ways to do that. And again, if you're post ESU, you might want to be running Windows offline. But as John says, you do need an OS that you can use all the time. And dual booting basically lets you easily switch between the two operating systems. So I think there are two basic use cases. One is for people who are new to using Linux. You basically boot into Linux by default when you power the machine on, but you have the option to go to Windows. And if you reboot your computer, then it's having the dual boot mode lets you get back to Windows rather quickly. So if you run into problems with Linux, you can always go back to Windows, which you know and love, and that basically makes the learning curve a bit simpler. For more experienced Linux users, one of the issues is that you may have software where there's no Linux version available, and that version of Windows software will not run in Wine. So you can't run that particular program on the Linux platform. So in that case, you definitely do need to be able to use Windows, at least from time to time, if you want to use that particular piece of software. And that's kind of the boat I'm in right now. I use Linux most of the time, but there's one package that fits those criteria that there's no Linux version and it won't run on Wine. So I need to be able to dual boot. And there are other ways to run Windows, clearly, virtual machines are one, but dual booting, basically you're running the Windows on Linux and Windows on your actual hardware, and you don't have the overhead of running Windows in a virtual machine on top of Linux. So there is that kind of benefit to dual booting. So what is dual booting? Well, dual booting means that you're using one computer, using the same computer, and you're running two different operating systems. And in this case, we're talking about running Windows and Linux. And to do that, we need some way of switching between them. So we have a boot menu, which is called grub, and we'll have a look at that later on. And when you load grub, then Linux is booted by default. If you don't do anything, you will end up in Linux. But by default, there's a 10-second pause, and that lets you look at the grub menu and use the arrow keys to scroll up and down the various options. One of those options will be Windows. So you can choose, do I want to go into Linux today, or do I want to run Windows? If you don't want to run Windows, then you can eliminate that 10-second pause by simply hitting the Enter key, and you go straight into Linux. One of the features of dual booting is that you have to use two disk partitions. Linux and Windows have to exist on individual partitions. You can use the same hard drive to do that, which is my preference, or you can use two hard drives, which I believe John likes to do, and that's one of the things he'll be talking about in part 2. But the basic thing is that you have different file systems. Linux typically uses ext4, and Windows uses NTFS. And those are both journaling file systems, but they're different. So that's basically why you have to have them in individual disk partitions. Now, the beauty of Linux is it can read and write NTFS disks. So it can open files, it can store files on a Windows type drive. By contrast, Windows pretends that it doesn't understand Linux partitions. So it sees the partition, but it won't tell you that, oh, this is Linux and it's ext4. I said you have to use separate disk partitions, one for Linux and one for Windows. The other thing you can do, and again, I think John will be talking about this, you can create a third partition which only contains your data files. So you can have your operating system and your applications for Windows on one partition, operating system and applications for Linux on the other partition, and then this third partition has the data files, word processing files, digital images, spreadsheets, anything like that. And that partition is available to either Windows or Linux. So you can use exactly the same set of data files with either operating system. And that makes dual booting really convenient. Okay, so Windows users. You're probably familiar with the Windows Disk Manager. This is what you see if you look at a hard drive. This is a GPT drive, so it's got lots of partitions. Most of them are Windows recovery type partitions. But you'll notice that in the middle at the bottom here, it can see Windows 10 drive C, and it can also see a data drive called D, and these are both NTFS drives. But over here on the end, it's got this 60 gigabyte partition, which is it says is a primary partition, but it tells you that it doesn't know anything about it. The file system is unknown to Windows. Well, lo and behold, if we were to run a Linux type disk manager, a partition editor, this in fact can see the Windows drive as NTFS, but it can also see that partition on the end, and it knows that that is a Linux partition. It's ext4, and in fact this is the root partition of my Linux system. And you'll also note that down here is that third partition, so I've got Windows on one partition, Linux on another partition. All my data files are available on this partition right here. As far as Windows is concerned, that partition shows up as drive D, but Linux doesn't use drive letters. So for Linux, it shows up as a data disk mount point. But it's basically the same set of files on the same data partition. Okay, so what do we need to be able to run Linux if we're a Windows user? And I've been hammering this in my own club for about a year now. Windows 10 reaching end of life, I've suggested that people who can't upgrade to Windows 11, rather than throwing your computer away in the great electronic waste heap, and why would you not look at Linux and consider basically trading up? I say trading up to Linux, because I think Linux is a vastly superior operating system. And to do that, you need a live USB or a live DVD. And that will allow you to just test Linux to see whether it's compatible with your system hardware. And it's basically a try before you buy kind of thing, a try before you decide to make the switch to Linux or to dual booting even, because the live USB doesn't really affect your computer at all. You're just running the Linux system directly from the USB. But if you install Linux, then you get to see how it works on your hardware, and you can certainly spend some time playing with the features of the operating system and the various applications that come bundled with it. I say dual booting has no effect, or minimal effect on the Windows installation. And really the only effect it has is that you have to shrink the Windows partition to make room for the Linux partition. But these days we're on such huge hard drives that losing some space on the Windows partition basically makes no difference. The nice thing about dual booting is that, as I said before, if anything occurs in Linux that you don't understand or whatever, you're always able to boot into Windows very easily. And when you do boot into Windows, the main thing is that you can run Windows only programs natively on your computer. So what do we need to do? Basically, here's a list of step-by-step guide to how to dual boot Linux on a Windows system. And you notice the first thing I suggest is that you might want to make a full disk image backup of your entire hard drive. And I suggest using, well, you can use whatever you want to do that. If you're using disk imaging right now as backup, then just use your backup software of preference. I actually like Foxclone, and I'll say a word about that in a minute. The thing here is that if anything went wrong with your dual boot installation, you can just recover this disk image that you've just made, and you're back to square one in 30 minutes or something like that. And I say it allows easy recovery if necessary, but trust me, it won't be necessary. I've done tons of these installations, and I've never had a problem. And then we'll go through the other things as we carry on here. So let's just think briefly about making a full disk image backup if you're not if you're not using disk imaging software, Foxclone is nice because it's a Linux-based system. You can download the ISO file. You notice that it's based on Ubuntu, and you create a live USB and boot from it. And sure enough, you get a Linux desktop, and one of the icons on the desktop is the Foxclone backup software. And when you run it, it basically reviews the partitions on your computer. And don't be surprised if it's unable to mount something. You notice here it's trying to mount SDD1, which is an external USB drive. This is in fact the USB flash drive that I'm running Foxclone from. So it doesn't want to play with that in terms of backing up. It's going to use the other drives on the system as sources and targets. So once it's gone through the process, then we have this main screen here. The top portion allows us to select the source that we want to back up. So clearly I'm interested in backing up my main solid state drive here. So I select that, and by default, it selects all of the partitions. So I'm making a full image backup of my entire hard drive. The next thing it wants me to do is to select the destination drive. So here I selected an external USB drive. And when I do that, I can navigate down to a folder, and then it creates this dated backup essentially whenever I did that. So I've selected the source, I've selected the target. It now gives me a summary of what I'm going to do. And I just say OK, and I get the usual kind of progress bars telling me how far things are along. And eventually it will say backup complete. I can say finish. And when I look in the backup folder, I see how I've got a whole raft of files. But if you look carefully, these are basically in pairs. So remember, there are a number of different partitions on the main drive. So I've got a backup, a compressed image file for SDA1, and a log text file for SDA1. So one's the compressed image, one's the backup information, and Foxclone will take care of this. I can recover the whole thing, or I can tell it, well, I only want to recover partition 9, and it will do the job. So a fairly simple way to do backup and restore of whole drives or individual partitions. All right, so we've got our backup. The next thing we need to do is find an appropriate Linux distro, a distribution file, which we will download as an ISO file, I would suggest using Linux Mint, and I would suggest using the Cinnamon edition. The current version is 22.2, which is codenamed Zara. The Cinnamon edition is basically very much like Windows. So if you're a Windows user, it makes the learning curve, the transition, fairly simple. If you click on download, it will take you to the download page. You scroll down until you find the Cinnamon edition. You hit download again, and now it wants you to choose a mirror from which to obtain the software. Since I'm based in Canada, I actually like using the Manitoba Unix group. They've always proved very reliable in terms of providing the current versions of the software. But there are mirrors all over the world, and lots of them in the US, and no doubt some in Australia and others in Canada, as you can see. So you choose a mirror, and then it will say save the download in your preferred location. And you notice that we're downloading this file .iso. So this is the ISO file that we're downloading. This is our Linux Mint distribution. All right, we've got the ISO file. Now what we need to do is create a live USB. So we need some image writing software. And typically, if you've been using Windows, you may have used Rufus. It will write one ISO to a USB drive. USB drives are so big these days. I hate using them just for one distro. So I tend to use Yumi, which is a multi-distro option. You can load multiple distributions on the same flash drive, and then you have a menu that selects between them. However, for the present purposes, I'm going to recommend Boolean Etcher because it's very, very simple. Rufus and Yumi, you have to kind of know which drives which, and which buttons to press, basically. Boolean Etcher leads you by the hand. So let's take a look at that. So here's the address to get the software, the URL. When you load the home page, just go to the download Etcher button, and that will take you to a page where you can select the distro that you want. We want the one for Windows. So we're going to download this installer. And again, we need to save it. This time, we're downloading an exe file. So this is an executable file, which is Boolean Etcher. All right, so we've got our distro, we've got our image writing software. Now we're ready to create the bootable USB drive. So here's my download directory, and here's the exe file for Boolean Etcher. It turns out this is a portable file, so you don't need to do any installation. You just double click on this exe file and the program will start running. And when it runs, it gives you this main screen here, and you can see there are three main options here. First of all, it says flash from file. So what it's asking here is it wants us to select the ISO file for the distro that we've just downloaded. So we click on that button, it will give us a browse window. We go down to wherever we've stored our Linux Mint 22.2 ISO file. We select that, and now we've selected the source. The next thing we have to do is tell it, well, which USB drive do you want me to create as a live Linux USB? So again, I can click on select the target. It will show me the drives that are in place on my system. The one I want is this 32 gig USB drive right here, which is showing up as drive G. So I'm going to select that. And then finally, hit the flash button and start writing the ISO file to the flash drive. And you can see here we had a progress bar that the flashing is in progress. Once it's finished that, it does a validation routine, and then eventually it will say that flash is completed. And now we have indeed created our bootable USB drive. Okay, so now we've got our Linux version, our Linux system on a bootable USB. Now we have to know, how do we boot the USB on our computer? And everybody probably knows that, but if you don't know, Mr. Google knows everything, as you all do know. So you just have to ask Mr. Google, how do I boot my computer from a USB drive? And in my case, it just says, well, when you power up, just hit the F12 key, and that will give you a one-time boot menu. And then from that boot menu, I can select the USB drive, and it will start to load. So I now know how to do it. So now I need to boot into Linux from the USB drive. So I stick the USB drive in the computer and power it on. It loads a menu. And this is our first look at Grub. This is the Grand Unified Bootloader menu. And you can see we have a number of different options. However, you can also see the very first option is highlighted. It has an asterisk, and it says Start Linux Mint 22 Cinnamon 64-bit. So that's clearly what we want to do. We want to run Linux and see how how it's going to work on our system. Remember, this is a live USB. So all we have to do is basically hit return and it will start to load, and it will take a little while, but eventually you will get to a Linux desktop. And this, even if you're a Windows user, this should look vaguely familiar. And you should be able to see a desktop with some wallpaper, rather black and ominous. You have some icons. You have a taskbar down here with more icons. There are two that we need to think about. The first icon up here, we'll take a look later on. It says Install Linux Mint. And this icon in the bottom left-hand corner, just like Windows, is a Start menu. So now we're at the situation where we've booted into Linux. So the first thing we can do is just to take a look at the operating system and the applications that come bundled with that operating system before we need to do anything else, or at least we need to try things out and see if things are going to work on our hardware. And when you hit that main menu button, this is the main menu. You have a bunch of categories of different software, and when you click on a category, then you find all of the applications that are available in that category. So you click on one of those, and it will load, and you can play around with all these applications that come bundled with Linux. Anyway, let's pretend that we've done that because we're interested in how do we dual boot. So we're finally at the stage where we want to install Linux on the PC, on the hard drive, in dual boot mode. So remember on the desktop, that famous icon at the top left-hand corner there said Install Linux Mint. And if we indeed double click on that, then it will take us into an installation wizard. And most of the time, this is just a question of looking at what's going on and hitting continue, because generally we're going to accept the defaults. There are one or two things that we have to provide some input, and we'll take a look at those in detail. First thing, we choose the language. Well, for me and probably for most others, that's going to be English, so we can just say continue. And the next thing that comes up is, do we want to connect to Wi-Fi? Well, I would like to connect to Wi-Fi, so I'm going to select this connect to the network radio button right here. And it has a look around and it sees that it's got a whole bunch of different local area network access points. And I'm going to choose this one, Duck Pond Extended, and I'm going to try to connect to that. And it says, well, this is a secure connection. This is my local area network. It's a secure connection, so I need a password. So I'm going to give it the password. I'm going to give it the password for two reasons. First of all, I want to connect to Wi-Fi right now so that the installer can download and process files from the net as it goes along. But the second thing is, if I give it the password now, Linux is smart enough to remember it. So next time I boot into Linux, it will actually remember how to connect to my Wi-Fi, and I don't have to worry about it. So that's another reason to give it your password. Tell it to connect, and now it's ready to go. You can just say continue. And now it wants to know, do we want to install multimedia codecs? So these are the software modules that allow videos and audio files of various formats to play on the system. And I'm happy enough to do that. So I'm going to click on that guy and say continue. And now we get a weird thing. If you're a Windows user and you've never used Linux before, this is really bizarre. And you probably have to go to Mr. Google to find out what it's all about. However, I will tell you. What it says is the installer has detected disk with mounted partitions. And it says, I found a device SDC. And it says, do you want the installer to try to unmount the partitions because otherwise it can't do this or it can't do that? Now, device SDC, device just means it's some kind of disk. SDA is my main hard drive, this solid state drive that we're trying to install Linux on. SDB on my system is actually an SD card, which I have plugged into my laptop all of the time, and it's there for a real-time backup solution that I use. SDC is the flash drive on which I'm running as a live USB and is running the installer. So I don't actually want to do anything to that SDC drive. I don't want to delete partitions. I don't want to add partitions. I don't want to resize partitions. I don't care about that drive. It looks after itself. So it turns out it doesn't matter whether I say, no, I don't want you to unmount it, or yes, I do want you to unmount it. You can pick whichever you choose. Yes, sounds good. So let's say yes, unmount the drive. All right, this one is important, but you notice here the default is install Linux Mint alongside Windows Boot Manager. So in other words, I want you to install Linux on the same drive as my Windows partition. And it's going to sort out the actual partitioning. But what we don't want to do is a second option, which isn't selected, which is erase the disk, erase everything on the hard drive, and just install Linux Mint. In other words, blow Windows away and only install Linux. If that's what you want to do, that's fine, but that's not dual booting. We want to install Linux alongside Windows, and that's what we need for dual booting. Something else leads to manual partitioning, and that's something I think John will be talking about in part 2. So again, we're going to accept the default, install Linux Mint alongside Windows Boot Manager. We can just say install now. So as I said, the installer basically takes care of the partitioning. So it may not be obvious here, but what it's done is it's taken the Windows partition and it's decided that it's going to shrink it and leave 36 gigabytes of space available to install Linux Mint. And the arrows here kind of indicate that I can take this partition slider here and I can make Windows smaller, or I can make Windows bigger by moving that slider along. Personally, I wouldn't know how to, I wouldn't know what was a good number right now, let's say, as a new user. So again, I would suggest let's accept the default as being a valid number. And how did they come by that number? Well, I'm not absolutely sure, but I think it's something like this. My SSD is about 250 gigabytes nominally. The Windows partition is taking up 245 gigabytes. However, I'm only using 175 gigabytes of actual space in that partition. So that means that there is 70 gigabytes of space on the partition that isn't being used. Now we have to make some space somewhere to put Linux. So what the installer is doing is it's going to shrink Windows from the 245 down to 210 or something like that. And that's going to leave 30 gig, 35 gig free for Linux. So it's taking the unused space, 70 gig, let's say, in round numbers. It's giving 35 gigs of that to Linux, and it's leaving 35 gigs free for Windows future use. And you can change those numbers later on if you decide that you need to make one or the other bigger. However, for now, let's just accept the default and go with the 36 gig partition for Linux. Now, the first thing it's telling us here, it's warning us, well, we have to write the changes to the disk, but if you do this, then you can't go backwards. So it's giving you a chance to go back. Well, we're fearless. We're fearless Linux users. We're going to just say continue. And it's almost ready to continue, but again, it's just telling you that, hey, you've decided to create this new partition, and we're going to format that as ext4. and you remember that's the default for Linux partitions. We have to do this if we want to install Linux. We have to create a petition and format it. So again, let's just be brave and say continue. And now it wants to know where we are. Well, it turns out it doesn't really want to know where we are. I'm in Ottawa, and I spent some time trying to tell it I was in Ottawa. Turns out there is no option to tell it I'm in Ottawa. What it really wants to know is what time zone are you in? And it selected the time zone, what it thought, and it turns out that's correct. That's his Eastern time zone. So I'm happy to say, yes, Eastern time zone is good. Let's continue. All right, but now it really does want some input from us. So we have to fill out some of these boxes. It turns out that we can put almost anything we want in here. The only exception is that when we have to pick a username, the username has to start with a lowercase character. So I can't use capital A Alan, I have to use lowercase a Alan. And if you don't do that, then it will give you a warning and it won't continue. So that's the only caveat. However, I'm going to tell it that my name is Alan, and by default, the installer has decided that it's going to call my computer Alan Inspiron 7547, which I think is the model number. And it's by default, it's decided I'm going to be Alan. And note that it's gone to lowercase a. However, I actually don't want my computer to be called Alan. This thing, I want it to be called i7 Inspiron because that's what makes sense to me. So I changed that in that box. And again, I actually don't want to be called Alan because I always use a different username for my login criteria, and I use the username Toaster. So I changed that. Next thing I have to do is pick a password. So I enter a password. It says it's weak, but personally, I don't really care. I don't give other people access to my hardware, so any old password is probably good enough. I do have to confirm that password, and notice now I've got to click that a check mark that both passwords match. So that's a good thing. The final things here I just leave as default. I say require my password to log in, so that's okay. Linux will remember the username, but it will always ask me for the password, and I'm happy with that. That works fine for me. If you don't want to do that, you can choose the other option here, which is log in automatically. But by default, it's going to require a password, and by default, it will not encrypt the home folder. Personally, I don't encrypt the whole hard drive or the home folder. I only encrypt sensitive data files in a encrypted container. So I don't really want to encrypt the whole thing. So I can leave those as the default entries. Okay, so now we go through a series of kind of welcome screens and a progress bar which tells us how things are going. It says here it's copying files. And then later on, it tells us that, well, we'll be able to browse the web because we'll have Firefox installed by default as a web browser, and we can run Netflix and YouTube apps if we so desire. So there's a whole series of these screens. I think I've got another one right here. If you want to stay connected, then you can install things like WhatsApp. These are not necessarily, these don't come with the distribution, but they're available for installation. And you'll see a whole bunch of these screens, various things will happen down here, but eventually it will pop up with this window and it will tell you that your installation is complete. You can continue testing because remember we're running on a live USB. So the Linux system is running directly from the USB and we can keep playing with it as such. Or I would suggest just take the bull by the horns and press restart now, and that will load the grub menu and by default go into Linux, which is now running directly from your hard drive. Okay, so that's basically the story of how to create a dual boot Windows Linux system on a computer. Couple of optional extras here. It turns out that Linux has a shutdown app, and this shutdown app is owned by the root user. And if I want to use it as a regular user, which I do, then I have to change the user permissions. And I use this terminal command here. Sudo gives me as a regular user elevated privileges so that I can run the chmod command, and I can use the switch U+S, and that basically tells chmod that I want to change the set UID bit, set the user identification bit, if you like, on this program shutdown, so that anybody can use it with root privileges. And once I've done that, I can run shutdown, and I can use it in two different forms, which I'm interested in. One is to use shutdown -p now, which is the shutdown command, so that powers off the computer completely. Or I can use shutdown -r now, which is the restart command. So if you think about it, we're running Linux and we desperately want to get to Windows, so we could say shutdown -r now. I will restart, we get to the grub menu, and we can boot into Windows. I find that a bit cumbersome. I don't like using terminal commands. So rather than doing that, what I can do is I can create program launchers. And Linux users are probably familiar with this. Windows users, these are called shortcuts in Windows. And you'll notice down the bottom right-hand corner there, I've got a green one, which is restart, and a red one, which is shutdown. And the way I do that is I go into the desktop here anywhere, and I do a right click. And when I right click, it pops up this context menu, and I can scroll down here and select create a new launcher here. So this is how you would create a program launcher, which, remember, in Windows terminology is a shortcut. So here's the dialog box to create a new program launcher. So I'm going to tell it that I want this program launcher to be called shutdown. And here's where I give it that terminal command, or the Linux command, shutdown -p now. And I'd be happy to do that, except I want to change this icon over here. I don't like rocket ships necessarily. So I'm going to click on him and select it. And that will pull up a browser, so I can, a file browser. So I can go down to my list of pictures, and I can choose this shutdown.png file. And when you load this dialog box, you have to select the icon again before the select box shows up as live. Once you've selected the image, then you say select, and now you've changed the icon for this program launcher to a red something or other circle with a slash in it. So now I can just say OK, and it says, do I want to add the launcher to the menu as well? Clearly I'm going to create the launcher on the desktop, but it says, do you want to add it to the start menu? Well, why not? I never use it from the start menu, but it will be there if I ever need it. Turns out it shows up in the other category. So if you select other, all the applications in other are here. Here's the restart one, here's the shutdown one, and Ocular, if you're interested, is a particular PDF viewer, which I use for various purposes. However, what I'm really interested in are these two things over here. So in the bottom right-hand corner of my desktop, I now have an icon or restart. If I double click on that, it will just restart the computer and go to the grub menu. If I double click on the red one, then it will power the machine down. Personally, I find that much more convenient, much easier than going to the start menu and the power and then shut down going through the various menuing type processes. Just double click on the icon on the desktop and we're off to the races. Now, I mentioned the grub menu has multiple choices, and here's the grub menu for the actual Linux installation that we just made. You notice again it's got Linux Mint 22 Cinnamon Edition. You notice the star, the asterisk, that's the default entry. We've got some advanced options. We've got the Windows Boot Manager and some firmware settings, so we can do all of those things. And there's a 10-second counter going on right now. And if we don't do anything because of that star, the computer will boot directly into Linux. But if I want to boot into Windows, I use the arrow keys. Notice down here, use the up and down arrow keys. I can down arrow into Windows, hit return, and it will boot into Windows. So that's basically the boot menu that allows you to select between Linux and Windows. Now, again, personally, I never use those advanced options, and I don't use the firmware settings. I can get to those by other means. I like to have a simpler menu, which I find is more efficient in terms of usage. And you can do it using software, using various commands, but it's quite complicated. But as with all things Linux, there's always an easier way. And the easier way is a program called Grub Customizer. And this is developed by somebody called Daniel Richter. However, it's not available in the Mint repository. Again, for Windows users, most software that you install for Linux Mint is available in a curated repository. So the Mint developers test software and make it available through this program called Software Manager. So you don't normally have to run around the web trying to find a program that you're interested in and download it, install it. Use the Software Manager, and it's much easier to install anything that's available there. However, this particular program is not available that way. But Daniel provides what's called a personal package archive, a PPA. And we can install that using some terminal commands, and Daniel's provided those. So you notice here that we have to add the repository. We update the software appropriation tool. I forget what that's called right now. And then eventually we install Grub Customizer. So we use those 3 commands in terminal, and that installs Grub Customizer on our system. So once we run Grub Customizer, we see this. And a couple of interesting things here. If you remember, on the menu, we had Linux Mint 22.2 Cinnamon as the menu entry. You don't see that right here. What you do see is an entry for Ubuntu. And Mint is a variant of Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is a variant of Debian. But Grub Customizer thinks that we're running an Ubuntu version of Linux. So we're going to fix that in a minute. Here's those advanced options, and you notice most of them are different Linux kernels. So you can run different kernels if you had the need to. I think you would only ever do that if Linux crashed and you couldn't boot the first kernel, the main kernel. If that happened to me, I wouldn't bother playing around with the extended things here. I would just restore an old disk image and be back in running in basically 2 minutes. So I'm not interested in the advanced options. Here's the entry for Windows Boot Manager, and here's the entry for the firmware settings. First thing I want to do is to select this advanced options here, and then go to the remove option on the menu bar here. So I'm going to say remove the advanced options, and you notice they got transferred over here into this right-hand column, and they don't appear anymore on the menu here. So let's do the same thing with firmware. Let's get rid of firmware and let's remove him, and we'll move him over here. So now our boot menu is only going to have an entry for Linux and an entry for Windows, which is exactly what I want, except I don't want it to be called Ubuntu. So let's select Ubuntu by right-clicking on it. So let's right-click on the menu item, and then what that does is it pops up this menu, this context menu here, and we can select rename. So we want to rename this entry called Ubuntu. And when we do that, we get a blank screen here, blank window, blank box. So I'm typing in Linux Mint 22.2, and this is codenamed Zara. So that's what I'm going to have as my entries. So now I just need to go over here and click on Save. Let's save that. So next time we boot our computer, we have a new grub menu, which we've just customized. And you notice that we have an entry for Linux Mint 22 Zara, and we have the original Windows Boot Manager. So now, again, Linux by default, the star, the asterisk there. If I don't do anything, I'll boot into Linux. If I hit the down arrow and enter, I can boot into Windows. So for me, this is a really easy and efficient way to either boot into Linux or boot into Windows. I either hit return, I go into Linux, or I hit down arrow return and I go into Windows. So a very simple way to run or switch between the two operating systems. Okay, so that's basically everything I have. Let's just take a summary here. I think I've shown you that creating a live USB for any Linux distro is pretty easy. Elena, what was it called? Elena Betcher or something? Elena Etchebalena is a very easy image writing, very image writer software, very easy to use. It's also really simple to install Linux alongside Windows in this dual boot mode. You just have to run the wizard and follow along, and I've given you essentially step-by-step instructions. You'll get the deck later on from Judy, so you'll be able to review those and again follow along as if you want to do this installation. Once you've got the dual boot system enabled, then you will boot into Linux by default. If you don't do anything, you end up in Linux. If you hit return, you end up in Linux. However, you can use those arrow keys on the grub menu, and you can choose instead to boot into Windows. Personally, I like the use of program launchers to make switching between the OSs easy. I just hit restart, and then I'm back to the grub menu. And as I've shown you, the grub menu can be easily customized by using one of these wonderful open source third-party developed programs, which Linux has tons of, and is why I really like the Linux operating system. It works really well. There's always a fix for things if things go wrong, and there's always an application which does what you want. And I can't always say the same thing about Windows. Anyway, there you have it. That's how to do dual booting Linux and Windows. So if there are any questions, I'm open to try to answer them. So over to Judy.
Hey, thank you, Alan. Great presentation and good, looking forward to your presentation, a presentation next month on other ways that you can dual boot. So we'll have everything that we need. And my question is to call on Chris Taylor, your group member.
Oh, we don't talk to him.
Oh, we don't want to talk to him? Okay, sorry. You pull me in advance, okay?
If anybody doesn't know,
Chris,
if anybody doesn't know, Chris,
Hit the mute button.
Rather than a question, I do have a comment, and it came to bite me on when I was doing dual booting with Linux, and that is that if you hibernate your Windows system, when you boot into Linux, your Windows partition will only be viewable as a read-only partition. And so you can't modify any files in there. And so make sure you don't do a hibernate before going into Linux. Now, one really gotcha is that if you have fast boot enabled on Windows, what that does is essentially hibernates your system and then shuts it down. And so if you do have fast boot enabled, you will always end up when you go into the Linux side of things, your Windows partition will only be read only. So you might want to turn off fastboot and then not hibernate your system if you want to be able to modify files that are on your C partition in Windows.
Very good suggestion.
Yeah, good point, Chris. Personally, I have turned off fast boot. I never use hibernation. I think I've turned that off too. For those of you who don't know, Chris is president of the APCUG user group, which is my user group. So that's why I can badmouth him on this channel.
We do our best. What can I tell you? Any questions for Alan, or was it so clear? Mr. King, you're on.
Yes, I have a question. In the unlikely event, and I haven't had this happen to me, but I've heard about it happening, um, that Windows updates could at some point down the road do something to mess up your dual boot configuration. How, if that should happen, do you repair the grub boot menu so that you can get back to dual booting again?
Yeah, I've actually never had that happen either, Drew. If you do have a problem with the grub menu, what you basically do is use the live USB and then use I believe it's a sudo update grub command, and that basically refreshes the grub menu. It's all documented on the web somewhere. I think it's on my Linux North blog somewhere. So if it ever happens, there's a fix.
Great, thank you.
That's the wonder of having the live USB, because that's the way you do that. Also, you would do that to have to set up somebody's password. And I will mention that Judy sent me something a long time ago that was a comment, an article that every Windows user should have a Linux USB for the fact that it can access files from Windows, even if the Windows won't start up. You can still do that, but that's for another day. But yep, that's it. Use that re-update grub, and it fixes it, but it's a pain because you have to get out the thumb drive, you have to boot the thumb drive, then you have to go in the terminal and run that.
Now, the other way to do it is to use that disk image and just restore the last disk image.
Yeah.
That blows everything away and starts fresh. So and then all you have to do is update, the operating system or applications, whatever.
Is that something, would that be something that Microsoft would be doing specifically because they'd rather you not dual boot?
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, then
I don't think it happens. I've never seen it. So
yeah, I think I've had it happen over the years, but then I have a solution to stop that, which you'll hear about next month.
Okay, then I won't say that when in the legal department, in-house legal department, everybody went away from WordPerfect because the Orem, Utah people sold it to somebody who really didn't do anything with it, and Word took over, the legal system and everything. That it was horrible to try to move your WordPerfect docs to Word. That I eventually had the admins retype every single contract and document, the whole 9 yards, because it took them much less time to do that than fix the mess when you just, changed it from WordPerfect to Word. And I always thought that Unmentioned Company did that on purpose. I could say that was my first conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
My next one's moving 10 to 11, but that's okay. Richard Bradford, let's hope we can answer your question this time.
Oh, it's not a question, just a comment.
Okay.
If you've got a Windows 10 computer that's not going to update to 11, then wiping out the grub bootloader is not going to be a problem because there's not going to be any more Windows updates to do it.
Well, true, but some of us have Windows software that we want to run, so we'd still like to be able to run Windows. Personally, when I run out of security updates, I'm just going to turn off internet access on the Windows side of the box, but I'll still be able to dual boot.
Yeah. I was going to suggest that that's one idea, is to turn off internet, so that's where your concern about security is. So you just run that computer like the old days off the internet, and then run Linux on the internet because it's secure and stuff.
Lester, you're on.
I remembered to unmute this time.
Oh, good.
I turned off the blocker.
Okay. So first, Alan, thanks for the great presentation. You covered so much stuff. I really appreciate it. As you were going through it, I noticed that you turned on the Wi-Fi. Whenever I do an installation, Windows or Linux, I always use the Ethernet cable and plug it in because I like to, not take as long. The wired method is faster. So I never, when I saw that pop up about dealing with a Wi-Fi, I said, I've never seen that. Well, the reason is because I always plug in my cable. Now, I'm not sure. Oh, there was a comment about possibly Windows screwing up the dual boot thing. I think it happened to me, probably the same as you, John. There was an update, and I think they turned fast startup back on. It wasn't intentional, but all I had to do to fix that was to turn it back off again, and I've never had a problem since. That was maybe a year ago. Another thing is, I think if you want to install dual boot on a modern computer, you have to turn off secure boot. I'm not sure about that, but it's something to, if you can't boot up your installation Linux installation stick, that could be the problem. Let's see. The last comment is password length. When you're installing Linux installing Linux, they allow you. I've used 4-character passwords. Of course it says too short, but it works. But then when you go to install an additional user, then they don't want this. They don't want 4. They want 8 characters at least for a password.
Oh.
Yeah. So, if you use the command line to create a password for a user, the same thing happens. The only time it's that first install that you can do that. I want to make one comment because I'm leaving early. On the internet Wi-Fi, the issue now, which I had run into, is that new laptops do not have Ethernet connectors. They only have Wi-Fi. The laptop that I'm on right now, or that's recording this, is one such. There is no Ethernet, so it has to be Wi-Fi. Now, I do have an Ethernet to USB adapter. However, the drivers sometimes for those adapters won't work until you've downloaded and done the updates. So you might be required to have to do the Wi-Fi initially so that you can be able to use one of these adapters like I have. Conspiracy.
David.
Yes, the conspiracy. I have an old laptop that doesn't work. The Linux drivers cannot drive the Wi-Fi in this laptop. So I have to set up a hotspot when I want to use Wi-Fi for some reason. Otherwise, it's Ethernet. My real reason for asking a question was I would like an elaboration on what does secure boot, how does that affect all of this dual boot stuff?
Yeah, I think as John mentioned, secure boot can stop you booting a Linux live USB. Personally, I've turned it off on my system, so I don't have that problem.
It works for me. Buy a new computer, okay? Same thing.
A lot of the more modern frontline distros now work with secure boot so that you don't have to turn that off, because with dual booting, you got to have secure boot turned on for the Windows side.
Yeah, the other thought, David, was have you only tried one Linux distro or have you tried several? I had an issue one time with Ubuntu where it couldn't access the Wi-Fi card on a little netbook I had. But I fixed that by switching to Mint. Mint was quite happy to use the same hardware. So it really depends on the distro, I think, what peripherals are supported.
Another quick workaround that I do is a Wi-Fi dongle, and then it just connects to your local Wi-Fi without a hotspot. And I had, in the older days, I had a laptop that had a very unique Wi-Fi that I could not use Wi-Fi until I installed, plugged in, wired, and went and got the download. So I then started keeping that driver that I needed on a thumb drive, and I could install it and have Wi-Fi right away. But yeah, I haven't had that much problem lately, but it did with a very unique Wi-Fi adapter. But the solution, the easy solution was I just popped in a Wi-Fi dongle and on my merry way.
In my case, I had a dongle that didn't work either. This is a HP ProBook 4540S. So maybe I just need to do some more research on other distros.
That's a good suggestion from Alan. Yes, and I'd be surprised, that Mint, it wouldn't work in Mint because Mint does just about everything.
Joel.
I was just going to say that I've used dual boot with secure boot on Fedora, but at least at the time I started doing it, some distributions didn't support it. And the other thing I think I ever had problems with it was trying to use VirtualBox with it. And the reason was that VirtualBox, you actually have to recompile the modules that are going into the nucleus on your own machine when you do updates. And there was no way to do that and have them marked with the standard secure keys. So you had to go into your BIOS and define your own local secure key and then properly mark those modules with a counterpart for that key in order to get it to boot and load the VirtualBox modules. It wasn't a serious problem for anything else, but without doing that, those modules didn't get loaded and VirtualBox wouldn't work. But other than that, Secure Boot did work with Fedora plus Windows 11 and 10.
Thank you. Ron, your turn.
Is my audio okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Cal and Alan. Two questions. Alan, I didn't, unless I missed it, you didn't bother to check the integrity of the download of the ISO. The one time I've done this, I guess it comes with an SHA 256 code of some kind.
I didn't do that, Ron. I have done it in the past. I've never had a problem. I've decided just to run the software, and if it doesn't work, then I check it.
Okay. Thank you. The other question, I have successfully installed, as it happens, still have 21.2 Cinnamon Mint, and I have it booting dual boot with Windows 7, and it works fine. The one thing I've never been able to figure out is how, in installing Mint, to have a separate home partition for data. Instead, I've defaulted to whatever the installation does, which seems to me to put everything in the root except for the what do you call the swap file.
Yeah, I actually do the same thing. I only accept the default. I think what you need to do is come back next month for part 2, because I'm pretty sure John is going to be talking about using a separate home partition.
Okay, thank you very much.
Paul.
First off, I want to say both presentations have been exceptional. They're very good. But I wanted to mention on the USB dongle or for Wi-Fi, I'm talking about, make sure it says it's Linux compatible. One of our techs here in the club was trying to get an old laptop working, and the first dongle he bought wouldn't work on it on Linux. But he did a web search and found one that said it was compatible with Linux and it worked with no problem.
Thank you. Minor.
And now you hear me.
Yes.
Has anybody talked about be your own nerd?
No, but it sounds cool.
It is. Be your own nerd. BEYOUROWNNERD is a website and also a YouTube site. This gentleman has instructions on how to put Windows 11 on a computer when you have a TPM 1.2 chip. I've done it now on 2 machines and it works just flawlessly. So easy peasy is what I found, and now I've got 2 of my older machines are running Windows 11, and until something else fails, I'll be in business.
Okay. And I will add, a week ago tonight, I attended the APCUG under the Computer Hood User Group meeting in San Diego, and their president gave a presentation on scary software. A couple of people that attended the Wednesday workshop joined us because they thought that was a cool title. And then one of their members, their random access, one of their members had brought a link to a video by Ask Leo Notenboom, on why you do not need to upgrade from Windows 10, period. And I gave a presentation to a group on Saturday. Lo and behold, their techie paraphrased that same article and video. And my meeting Monday night, I did the same thing. And I talked about it at a meeting last night where I gave a presentation, and over half of their group did not update yet. And they were excited to be able to check out Ask Leo and to see what he has to say about it. And so it's very interesting that there's many people out there who haven't, gone with the hype that the end of the world comes on October 14th. And it really, doesn't necessarily have to do that. And so we're having John Kraut next Wednesday, and he's giving a presentation on.
You want me to describe it, Judy?
Yeah, I have the document pulled up, but talk about it faster.
Okay. We're going to look at how to use the VLC software, which is a zero cost download, as a streaming server so that you can stream holiday music or any other kind of music that you prefer throughout your home on your local area network. Now, that will involve an introduction to the firewall on Windows because you have to adjust that, and I'll explain why in detail in the presentation, in order to allow other computers to request connection to that VLC that is offering the streaming music. I started this many years ago because my late wife collected a lot of digital holiday music. Originally, we streamed it. We did not stream it. We just had it connected to a speaker system from her iPod. And now I stream it throughout the house so that any digital device, and that includes other computers, any Android phone, any Apple phone, and even tablets, can receive it anywhere in the house. And if they're connected to speakers, they can make it nice and loud as well. So it's a good way to spread that holiday cheer.
Cool, thank you. And our other presentation is just the old-fashioned. I have a Windows 10 and I just want to take it straight up to 11. One of the San Jose, it used to be the IBM PCUG. One of their members asked if I would like him to give that presentation. And I said yes. So that will be our last upgrading. We've done like 3 or so on involved with Linux, and then this will just be Windows to Windows. And John is giving another Linux presentation in December, and it is talk about that.
Actually, today's presenters touched on it. I call it test driving Linux, and it involves using Linux installed on a USB device and how to make your Windows 10 box or any Windows box boot from that when it is connected so that you can try out Linux before you make a commitment to install it. Or before you decide you don't want to install it. Test driving is, I think, the best way to go. I did that myself, and you'll learn it, step by step how to do it.
Yeah. And he used to be a Windows guy, tried and true. And then Windows failed him.
Well, that's not quite accurate. I still have a laptop, a recent laptop running Windows 10. This laptop I'm speaking from is a 10-year-old laptop, which now has Linux Mint installed. And I have I have a Windows 11 Tower, and I have 2 Raspberry Pi devices. And one of those was my streaming device for music last year.
Mm-hmm. I need a presentation on Raspberry Pi. You up to for it in 2026?
I think I'd be happy to. In particular, I have the new Raspberry Pi 5, and it is for the first time a box that I think is a reasonable alternative in terms of its speed as to a Windows box.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate that. Let me know when you want to do it. Thank you. And my question is, how in the world do you really pronounce Linux? I'm a sight reader. I wouldn't do phonics if you paid me to do phonics. And I say Lin, Linux, UX. I hear Linox. I hear other versions. I just checked it up, and the guy who invented Linux says it's Len, Lenughh, or something like that. Let me see if I can find that. So, does anybody know the real pronunciation?
I use Linux because I am an old Unix programmer. I was employed to do that for many years.
Okay.
And frankly, when Linus says that's the way to pronounce it, you got to keep that in mind with a shaker full of salt because he's from Europe.
Well, true. Um, but anyway, it's because when people say Linux, what do I think of? An ox, animal, which I really don't think you want. Joel,
I'm pretty sure there's a recording somewhere of Linus Torvalds saying Linux.
yeah, he spells it Lenu something or other, something or other.
Yeah.
And I probably closed that. I was just looking for it. Oh, here we go. Lee, Lee, Nux, Nuhks. And I was surprised when I saw that. But I was just wondering,
Where is that?
Copilot search.
I would go by the author of the language. I think he says Linux.
No, it says it speaks his name. He puts his name there. This is the
Well,
way.
his name is Linus, but he
No.
deliberately says somewhere that that's not the way to pronounce the operating
Okay.
system.
Oh, well, we all know that this AI is just poo-poo.
Well, just keep in mind also the different pronunciation rules that apply in different European countries. As an example, the guy who invented the Pascal programming language, his name was spelled Wirth, and you know how Americans pronounce that, just like your money's worth. But he said his pronunciation was Wirt, and that's partly because some people, Europeans, particularly in the Germanic languages, treat a W as a V.
And I just realized too, some of you guys have accents. I don't. In California, we're just plain old whatever. And so you would add your, accent to. I was just wondering as a teacher. And any other questions? You guys know what's coming up. We are having a presentation by Al Williams, who is president of the Willow Valley Computer Club, one of those great big huge things on the East Coast. And he's going to talk about EULAs. And I can remember back in the day when we first started doing this, you always, or many people always took the time to read the EULA before they accepted the download. And they were non-techie, they were short and sweet and to the point, and you wouldn't be caught dead doing that now because it'd take you 2 weeks to read it. And so he's going to give a presentation on that. And I have a question for all of you. Do any of you on your websites have a link where somebody talks about your club or shows a video about what you do at your meetings and stuff like that? Pikes Peak in Colorado. I thought it was micro PC, but it wasn't. Pikes Peak has a spoken thing, and it tells about what they do. And Tech Ed Connect in New York has a video that they have just put up there. Just a different way of advertising your meeting on being able to click on something and listen. A lot of people just like to listen. They like to pick up the phone and talk to somebody or be able to leave a message. So I think every group should have a Google Voice number just for that one or two people who might be new members if they can just talk over the phone to somebody. So if you have a recording or something like that, let me know because I'd like them to be shared again with other groups as a different way to publicize their groups because we all know membership is hurting. We need to do everything we possibly can to get the word out about what we all do. So we're going to have a few of those. And now John's gone, so I'll say this again. John and I are also going to do the storybook, not the storybook, the learning series, that the first meeting in February when Safe Online people were here and asked us for our opinions as senior, tech users. And they were so excited for us to participate in that. Well, they have a little booklet out where I personally think they're too expensive, but that's okay. But John and I are going to go through those on, it's interactive. You could get one PDF and you could, have it for your meeting and have your members answer the questions for you. You could put it into a survey. What's the correct thing? And again, it's a different way to learn things, just like we learned last week about the storybooks that take 5 minutes to put together, that you could put a whole series on senior scams. Bob G's put 19 together, by snapping his fingers and doing it. Again, something to click through on your websites and maybe entice real and new members. This is what we learn about scams. Boom. Because we have to really start thinking out of the box from the way our websites often have looked the same for 16,000 years. Anyway, anybody else have anything to say? Because I'm it right now.
Judy, there is one comment that I would add on top of that idea of putting things on your website. Back when I first got involved with user groups, which was in the early 1980s, we had a meeting every year, usually in January, which we called Beginner's Day. And the one thing that I want to really firmly implant in every user group leader's brain is that the greatest opportunity to expand your group is because most computer users think of themselves as beginners. And if you can create storybooks or recordings on your website or through any other method that are aimed primarily at beginners, you will have greater success.
Outstanding. Good idea. Cool. So there's another, and we're here to share ideas to keep us going, to get new members. And your recruiting place, I'm sorry to say, are senior centers, senior living facilities. They're the ones that need the help. They usually don't have anybody techie to help anybody. Although when I'm at my Pierce Junior College meetings, people down there from the outside world say the job descriptions now for some of the employees at a senior center or a senior living, not assisted living particularly, but senior living, you have to know about all the operating systems. You have to know how to set up an iPhone. You have to notice how to help a person who lives there, their Android phone, etc. So the technology world is being put out there, and employees have to know this stuff. But here we are. We know this stuff coming and going, and we'd be more than happy to give a presentation, and that gets our name out. One of the groups in Illinois meets at a senior living facility. They have a member who lives there. That's their entree. And the people who live there are welcome to attend the meetings, so on and so forth. And if you have an assisted living facility or retirement community in your area, we have several who meet places like that. Ask them, and look them up. Do you have other facilities? And look it up, other parts of the states or a chain. And your entree to you're introducing yourself as, we have a club that meets at your facility in fill in the blank, and perhaps, we could show you what we got by giving you a presentation and stuff like that. And you have a very interesting homepage that's, hi, this is our target market. And everybody always says we got to get young people. Well, my daughters are in their late 50s. And for as long as I've been doing this, as long as or longer than John has, they wouldn't be caught dead coming to a meeting like this with all these old people. And they all worked with it from the beginning. And so they don't need what we offer, but there's a gazillion seniors out there that are still in the cold. That's it. Thanks for attending, and goodbye.